Matthew 25. Honestly, I hope this isn't just a grade for you. Let's try to get what we can out of this, all right? And hopefully you have an understanding. Here we have yet another kingdom parable, so to speak. In truth, all of Jesus' teaching revolved around the kingdom, really. He happened to choose to teach here in the form of a parable. But even if he taught his apostles, and think of it this way. If it was the Lord's intention to have been his return to have been imminent, even from the time that he left, all of the teaching he gave to his apostles and disciples were how to be good citizens of the kingdom of heaven, because it was to have happened right then. Because it didn't, of course, and the postponement period, we don't know how long that's going to be. But if you think about this teaching in the viewpoint of he's teaching them to be good citizens of his kingdom, and it kind of opens up some understanding to us. We try to fit the church in there, and the things that are happening in the church, and this is the interim period and all of that. And sometimes you can get into some problems, especially when it appears that some people in the church are condemned to hell. So then people change their eschatology to fit the parable. See how that's what happens, okay? You have what you believe to be the proper view of eschatology, and essentially when the rapture is going to happen. You read a parable, it doesn't seem to fit into what you think, and so you change the meaning of and the interpretation of the parable to fit your eschatology. You see how it works with people? And that, coupled with the fact that, number two, people believe that the church is universal. It's a Protestant opinion. It comes from Catholicism. Well, and that comes from probably Gnosticism and universalism. But this idea of a local church, local New Testament church, independent, is a very Baptistic thinking. And I don't mean Baptist church because the sign says that. I keep reiterating that. But it is a Baptist assembly. Okay. Now, we as Baptists didn't name ourselves. I think that's pretty interesting, really. We were named by somebody else. Okay. We call ourselves Baptists and we align ourselves, but we didn't really have that name. Methodists called themselves that. They gave themselves a name. They organized themselves. But we were called Anabaptists, right, because the rebaptizer is what it means. It actually was a scornful term to begin with. But that's because we have a lineage then with all of those churches back from the book of Acts, okay, and we follow their teaching. There have always been those assemblies. So this idea of an independent local Baptist assembly is not new. Okay, it's been around since the time of that Christ really assembled his. Didn't John the Baptist really have an assembly of baptized believers? He did, and he pointed the way to Christ, the same thing that we do. So even from the time of John the Baptist, the same kind of assembly has been around. And was that an independent assembly? Yes. Were they universal in nature? No, it was very selective. It had to be saved and baptized. So this understanding has been throughout time. And when the Lord came and was teaching this, he was teaching Jewish people. Now, how does that go together? Because he gave promises to the Jewish people. And those promises the Lord will fulfill. And so the kingdom of heaven represents all of those promises. And the kingdom of God then is the spiritual application of that. Of course, you're not going to enter into the promises of God without a spiritual awakening. So we get to Matthew chapter 25. And let's rehearse real quick I guess I'll put it on the board for the sake of the video people. The 10 talents. This is Matthew 25. I believe it's 14 to 30. All right, so the first thing, what do we always look at? Contextual. Okay, so the contextual setting. So contextually, actually this parable doesn't lend itself very much to a lot of discussion contextually or historically, really. So we'll get pretty quick right into the interpretation of an application. So what's the contextual setting? Back in Matthew 24, it's the same thing as the 10 virgins. In fact, it is to be taken sort of this in conjunction. So Matthew 24, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, so apparently they journeyed from the temple buildings across the valley up into the Mount of Olives. And there the disciples came unto him privately, saying, and then there were three questions. when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So here are 3 questions. He begins to answer those things in Matthew 24, and we've gone through this already. So then he gives a parable to help them to understand, and we said that the parable of the 10 virgins then deals with there being this, where is it at here? Yeah, the beginning of chapter 25. So this has to do with this waiting period, right? And to have the proper, to be saved while you're waiting there. And the focus then is on the virgins. We're dealing with that interim period. We're dealing with the espousal period. Okay, so the Lord then is relating the eschatology to the Hebrew wedding ceremony and really to weddings in general. And it's in the espousal period, okay? So you have an espousal period, and then you have, of course, the wedding day. It's here. It's really that simple, right? And then you're married after that. Really that easy, right? You have the wedding, Beulah. There it is right there. So in this espousal period is the interim, really. There is, however, a 7-year period here, so this is really an undisclosed amount of time. We don't know. And this follows with with that thing. However, when we get here, you have your 7 years, and then you have your 1,000 years here, and then, of course, the eternal state. So in regards to this, I'm sorry, it should be over here. All right, you have a rapture time here in the Revelation 19. Remember, we looked at this is all review from what we looked at before. In the beginning of Revelation 19, you have the marriage supper of the Lamb. And this has to do with the rapture, and because it's the bride, right? And we hopefully said that the bride is the church, and prove that. So if the bride of the church, then this has to do with the bride. Then this is the wedding supper here. After 7 years, then this coming down here, you have then the great supper of the God. Okay, sorry. This is the wedding is here. All right. This is the coming of Christ, and this then is the fulfillment of the kingdom of heaven. Really, he comes to fulfill it there. And so there's a 7-year period between there. This the world is being purged here. All right, Revelation 19 brings that out pretty clearly. Here you do have a wedding supper, but here you have another supper, the supper of the great God. And that's verses 11 and 17. So Revelation 19 brings out that kind of that period, and that there's a parenthetical passage, the views and things in heaven, and then things on earth after that. So we understand then that the rapture has to be pre-millennial, has to be pre-tribulation, really. So this entire period here is the day of the Lord, right? That whole thing. And so he begins his promises there. When this happens, we have a definite time, markings of time, 7 years and so forth. And this is the book of Daniel. It is also, by the way, in the book of Daniel chapter 2 where we get the phrase kingdom of heaven. This is how we know, and when the disciples heard the phrase kingdom of heaven, they undoubtedly made the connection between what Christ was saying to Daniel's prophecy in chapter 2. So that's why we know the kingdom of heaven deals with the Jewish people, and that's why it's promises to them. Anyway, that's here. So what people do is they say, no, the rapture is sometime in here, or it's all the rest of them. They mix all this up, and then they begin to interpret the parables based on their understanding of eschatology. Let me help you then with the importance of eschatology. It's important that you understand your eschatology because you'll misinterpret the parables if you don't. Hopefully you understand that. So anyway, we have this. And so the contextual setting then deals with the Lord and his return. So his disciples asked him, when will these things be, that is one stone upon another? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? All right, so that is clearly from Daniel chapter 2, the end of the world system. When the uncut rock strikes the image and the image falls down, that's the end of that world system. And this is what they're talking about. They're asking them for an interpretation probably of Daniel chapter 2. Then after Matthew 24, so that's the contextual setting. Matthew 25 then has a series of parables that are to be interpreted based off of the contextual setting. One of them is the 10 virgins, all right? And we said again, this idea of a wedding is brought out there. And his preparation is to keep watch then for Christ's coming. So the important thing there was to keep watch, all right? to be vigilant. Vigilance would be the thing with the virgins because they have their lamps and all of that. And so the vigilance is the main thing there with the virgins, to be vigilant and to be waiting, to watch and to be always ready. When I think of vigilance, I think of setting up an ambush site. I remember when we were in Mount Fuji in Japan, we did cold weather training there, and we would sometimes it was fun kind of set up an ambush site because they kind of made it to where other patrols would go through there, and then after they went through there, you could just shoot them up. It was kind of fun. So you just waited for them to come through there. Sometimes you were patrol that got shot up, but at any rate, there was one time I remember, and it was freezing cold outside. It was very late at night, and I remember looking at a full moon. I remember, and we had our M16 there, and we're laying down in the snow waiting for this ambush site. And what they would do was they would put a cord through the rifles, and when the first person, who was usually the leader of it, would be all the way on this end, whichever way the patrol was coming through, then he would tug on the line, and everybody would shoot at the same time. Follow that? Because if you don't shoot at the same time, then because you have to wait for a larger body of the patrol to go through, so you have more kills. See what I'm saying? So the person over here would wait for all those people to come through, and he'd tug on the line, and everybody would go to town. So meanwhile, it's a process of waiting. You just wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And I can remember freezing cold. Here I am on the ground, freezing cold ground. I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And I'm laying up on my back. And so I was and you're trying to not make any noise. You can't move a muscle, nothing. You can't even shiver hardly. And so then I remember rolling over real slow like that because I was freezing. I rolled over my back like that. And I'm looking up at the stars waiting for that cord to go. And it seemed like it was forever, forever, forever. And you just kept waiting. Finally, and then you're all stiff. The cord gets pulled. And here you are. And of course it was blanks. But we're shooting blanks at them and everything, and all stiff, and we're sitting there forever and trying to shoot. But this idea of waiting and waiting for that time to come, that's the image that's invoked in my mind. So we have the parable of the 10 virgins. In conjunction with that then is this one. Now here we have a man, and let's see, verse 14, for the kingdom of heaven, there it is again, is as a man traveling into a far country. All right, so now here's a man. So the idea is waiting and being vigilant for the 10 virgins. Beginning in verse 14, the parable of the 10 talents is also in conjunction with that, but it gives a little bit different aspect. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. Now to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. All right, so here it says his Lord. And after a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. So the idea of authority is settled here, right? He's their Lord. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. And his Lord said unto him, well done, thou good and faithful servant. So 2 things that he says about this person, good and faithful. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. The Lord again said unto him, well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. It sounds to me like he has a problem with authority. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, now, before it was good and faithful, right? Now what are the adjectives? Wicked and slothful. He's full of sloth. Isn't an animal called a sloth? Yeah, real slow. Okay. Wicked and slothful, this has a different connotation. He says, thou wicked and slothful servant. So you had a good and faithful servant, and now you have a wicked and slothful servant, but they're all servants. Thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. He didn't deny that. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents, for unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have an abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And 30, cast ye the unprofitable servant. So here's another description of him. So he's wicked, slothful, and unprofitable. Not a good thing. Into outer darkness there shall be weeping and gnashing of the teeth. Okay, so we talked about the contextual setting. I read that so that we could look a little bit at the historical setting. Historical setting is pretty straightforward, and it is similar to the husbandman in the vineyard, right? The husbandman had the right to tell the servants of the vineyard that he was their authority, he was their lord, he was over them. All right, so here also there's a man, and it says that he goes into a far country and he delivered unto them his goods. So would it deal with land? Probably, but also would other things, all of his goods. So they were true stewards in the sense of the word. I think of Joseph with Potiphar, or Potiphar put everything he owned in his charge. This is the idea. So the things that Joseph was in charge of were not his own. They were another man's. It is very similar here, is the understanding, is that you have a man and he gives unto his servants all of his goods. He has a lot of them apparently, and so he gave some a portion of the goods and so forth. Okay? So this is the understanding. This man then had authority. He was the owner of those goods. He didn't. He had the right to do with his goods whatever he wanted to. He chose to make his servants responsible for his goods. Therefore, he has the authority. And when he comes back to receive the portion of those goods, does he have a right to do that? Did the person that had that gave the unjust I get these mixed up, but it's the wicked husbandman, right? And so he said there that he had the right to give them all a penny a day. Yeah, he had that right. It was his field. So we have this idea of authority, apparently, and not apparently, well, yeah, apparently, or most assuredly, the Jews had a problem with accepting Jesus' authority. So he's trying to straighten them out. All right, so this parable then is to be in conjunction with the 10 virgins. Just like the 10 virgins has the idea of vigilance during the espousal period, the idea of the 10 talents has the idea of working during the espousal period. So we are to occupy, okay? Occupy till I come, in other words, work, make something of it. So in the espousal period, as it were, before the Lord comes again, of which he is speaking here, to be vigilant is certainly the case. Take heed, watch, and pray. That's vigilance, isn't it? Always being vigilant, always making sure that you're on guard, watching. But then also during that period, it's not just watching and waiting. He expects us to work. And so this is what the parable of the 10 talents deals with. So pretty simply and pretty straightforward, we can say then that we're dealing with working during that time. The historical setting then really deals with authority. The historical setting deals with the understanding that the person's goods were entrusted unto the servants, but it wasn't the servant's goods, it was the master's, so he was the authority there. And also, this is interesting, and I don't know if Edersheim brought this out, or I don't know if you read it in one of those things, but some people say that this actually has a basis in history, that there was a king, Archelaus, I believe, is Herod's son. Did you read that? Was it Edersheim? Edersheim, okay. And that it actually may have its basis in actual historical setting. Whether or not he was talking about them or he was just saying just like this is happened, it's similar. Okay, he's using it as an example. So this king went away and he was supposed to come back again, and it actually did happen during that time. But suffice to say that we can look at it historically maybe that way, and maybe the hearers were making that connection with Archelaus. But at any rate, the issue of authority is there, and that's what he's trying to bring out. Okay. And they have a right to do those things. Now, where was this spoken? It was spoken on the Mount of Olives, all right? And it was directly spoken to who? Because it was on the Mount of Olives, who was there listening to it, and who was hearing it, and who did the Lord intend to hear it? Well, it says in verse 3, and he sat upon the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came unto him privately. So it was his disciples, all right? The Jews were probably not there. And so it was his disciples in particular. Particularly the 12 apostles, I would think. All right? Now, we have then a balance of teaching. Watchfulness or vigilance with the 10 virgins, but then the working during that espousal period, as it were, is what is dealt with the 10 talents. Okay, so the time then of vigilance is a time of vigilance and it's a time of work. Now, does that apply to us? It does, directly. We can liken this onto the times of Nehemiah. You've heard C.H. Spurgeon, the sword and the trowel. Heard of that? Okay, that's taken directly from Nehemiah 4:18, where the people were building the wall, but they had their swords with them. Okay, so sometimes you need to use your sword. This has the idea of vigilance and watching and guarding. And then sometimes you're working, building the wall. It's both of those things in conjunction. And so I think this is brought out with both of these parables. When you minister, and this is kind of a side note, but very important, we have, I think, an example of ministry there too. Sometimes you're building, and then sometimes you've got to use the sword. And even when rearing children, or whatever the case may be, when you're in a leadership position and you have authority, it is very much like working with the sword and the trowel. And if you use if you try to build when you should be using the sword, you cause damage. And when you use the sword when you're supposed to be building, there's damage there too. Okay? So what does it take? It takes discernment. Discernment then is important, and that's where maturity comes in, which is why your college years are really a chance for you to really advance in your maturity. You've got to mature a little bit. You've got to grow up. Okay? This is a very serious thing that we're talking about. And so maturity is very important. If you're going to be a goofball your whole life, and I know sometimes people fall back on goofing around because it's fun and you laugh and all the rest of it, it takes some of the pressure off. I get it. But you've got to deal with pressure, right? You've got to be mature. You've got to understand that what you're doing. Okay, and that's everything. You go out on the ensemble. For example, you could make the difference between whether somebody follows the Lord's will for their life or not. It's not just I'm getting up there and smiling and singing and all the rest of it. It's much more than that. And maturity puts your feet on the ground. And you have to understand that what we're doing here and what you're training for is more important than even the President of the United States, what he or, God help us, she might do in the future. Okay? It's more important. The things that we do and that we're training for supersede things on earth because we're dealing with eternity. All right? So is it important? Yes. Should we be more serious and more mature in what we're doing than somebody that is just in it to make money? Yes. Okay? They would feel themselves important because maybe they make business dealings with millions of dollars and all the rest of that, but really it's just millions of dollars. And what are dollars in God's eyes? Filthy lucre. It's just a bunch of dirty paper. That's what they're working for. What we're doing is far more important than that. And it's your level of maturity. And what we see a lot of times is a startling lack of maturity. Okay? You got to grow up. And you got to start getting serious, and you have to understand that what you're doing is important. And when you become moms and dads, you're building children, which is extremely important also. So you've got to wake up, and you've got to mature, and you've got to grow up. It's important. Okay? So this issue of maturity and working and being vigilant is the case in discernment. Okay? So this historical setting helps us with that. Now, so let's interpret then. All right, we'll go right into the interpretation. Again, the contextual and historical setting are pretty straightforward. We've gone through that before. That was kind of mostly a review. Now let's interpret. Here then, let's assign things, and we're going to open the discussion a little bit here, so be prepared to think. The kingdom of heaven is like as a man traveling into a far country. Who would this man be? Who would we interpret this man to be? Traveling into a far country and then coming back again. Pretty obviously, who is that? It's the Lord, okay? It's our Savior. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. He's the master. He's the one who's going to come back. Who are the servants then? Okay, and right, but who is he talking to in particular? Who is he dealing with here? The apostles, the disciples. Okay, so then in the postponement period, the Lord has chosen the church. Okay, so this would be actually, if we're going to be really concise with it, these would be baptized church members. All right, but let's just go ahead and take that step. That's what we're talking about. Does the Lord work through anything other than his church? Can you give me an example in the New Testament where the Lord Jesus Christ works through somebody outside of his church? And maybe there is. I can't think of one. Okay, Paul on the road, he worked through a church member of Damascus, Ananias, to tell him those things. Paul and Barnabas and Silas and all that were sent out of the church at Antioch. He always works through his church, okay? Because that's what he promised before he left. Therefore, he expects all of his service and all of the work done for him to be out of the church. Hopefully you settle that in your mind, because these parachurch organizations are not backed by the Lord Jesus Christ. They cannot be. If you're to back these parachurch organizations, then what he's saying is that he's going against what he said that he would do. He said, "I will neither leave you nor forsake you," but he's talking to his church there. So the church is important, and when we understand furthermore that when Paul came, he gave us understanding that Christ is the head of the church. Now I can go off on a rabbit trail here, but let me just say that if you're a baptized church member, then Christ is your head. If you're not a baptized church member, what's the conclusion? Christ is not your head. By the way, that's what church discipline is all about. That when a church member is no longer in good standing, he is to be pushed out of the church. And then what does the Bible say about that? That he was given unto Satan. Doesn't Paul say that about that person that was causing problems in the church of Corinth? That's Satan. Because if you're not underneath the protection of the church and you go out from underneath the protection, the hedge of protection around you is gone. And Satan has it. And the whole idea was that this person out here would look and say, okay, I don't want this, and come back again. Follow? So if that's the case, then what is the difference between being here and being here? Christ is not your head here, and is here. Well, so is being a member of a New Testament local assembly of baptized believers important? Yes, if you're going to live your life with purpose, if you intend to do anything for the Lord Jesus Christ, it is important. But people are downplaying that importance, and you have church splits and things, and you have your house churches now, quote unquote, okay? That is not backed by the Lord Jesus Christ, nor is any parachurch or organization. Now you can, people say, oh, you're just ultra-Baptist. No, we're ultra-Bible, okay? That's what the Bible teaches. It has nothing to do with what the name of the sign says. All right, let me move on. So the servants then would be those, and in the postponement period would be baptized church members of a local assembly. And now, here's the big question. Now, I'll save that for the end. What is the idea of going away of the Lord? Okay, when this Lord goes away, that is, of course, the ascension of Christ, right? He's gone, but he's going to come back again. It's that understanding. The return of the Lord then is the second coming. And then the treatment of the servants by the Lord is him fulfilling his authoritative role. He is authoritative. He has the right then to do whatever he wants to with his goods. He also has the right to reward and punish his servants for service well done and not well done. He is the authority. He is in charge. He can do what he wants to there. Again, it's important to do that because this issue of authority comes up again. Now, two more questions. And here's the big question. What are the talents? What exactly are those things? Now, he uses the word talent, and that has a definition to it. But is he using that figuratively or literally? Well, if he's using it literally, then he gave some money, pieces of money to people. Okay, if you want to say that literally. If you want to use it figuratively, then what does it really mean? What is the talent? Exactly what is it? It's not clearly defined for us here.
Maybe the gospel.
So to one was giving 5 gospels, the other 2, the other one.
I'm not saying the number actually has an effect on it. We were given the gospel, and so we're supposed to bring others to the gospel.
So the idea of 5, 2, and 1, though, how is that?
I really don't think that's important.
Okay.
It's referring to anything that we're to be stewards of.
Okay, so the Lord's goods, right? It says that. Okay, the talents are the goods. So, yeah, I think this idea of a lot, not so much, is important. Okay, it has to do with goods. You're hitting us. Anything else? Yes.
Well, the thought just comes to me that it's something that he gave to them, expecting them to make more of. So it would be anything that he gives to us, whether it's a certain, to use the word talent that we have, that we can use for him and to possibly use it to bring others to him.
Yeah, you hit on
more of something.
You hit on something. It's something that you can produce more of. Yeah, that's a good point, Dustin.
I was just saying we can look at it probably as talents that we've been given, like Trevor said, or possessions that we have that we can use.
Okay, and the important thing there too is that they're not our talents, the things that we've been given. Now we use the word talent sometimes in a figurative sense to mean something that we're good at. But we have to understand, and that may be, I'm not saying it's not there, but even the things that we may be good at are given to us. It's not our own. And so I think all of these things are true, but I think that whatever our definition is, it has to be something that is somewhat quantitative. What I mean by that is something that you can produce more. So now, if we say it's talents, whatever it might be, and we're giving ourselves to the Lord, how do you produce more of that? That's my question in that one. It doesn't seem to make sense where we say, okay, well, let's say you have a good talent of music, and you're given a portion of that. I don't know, we say that. And so it would be extremely figurative to say that it would be a talent that is like musical talent or preaching talent or teaching or whatever. How do you produce more of that is the question. So you're playing your music. Well, how do you gain more? You know what I'm saying? We're trying to bridge the gap between figurative and literal. What exactly is the talent? You see how sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. We're trying to get to what it is. Well, we can say for sure. Anybody else have anything? These are good thoughts.
If we take it in the sense of his talents, as far as multiplying it, maybe exercising those talents and trying to better ourselves.
That would certainly be the case, yeah. But exactly how are they multiplied would be the question there, exactly in what way. I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm not saying that there isn't by bringing up the ambiguity, but what I am saying is that there has to be something there. All right, so what we can say then is that it literally, in a literal sense, he says there it's his goods. So whatever the master, the Lord here owns, his goods then, whatever he owns, which if it's the Lord Jesus Christ, we're saying, what does he own? He owns everything, okay? So he gives part of that to this, part to here, okay? And it's based on every person's ability to be able to handle that responsibility. Something else?
I think that whether it's money or talents or spiritual
Ability.
strength or ability or whatever, the emphasis is not on that. The emphasis when he rewards them is on their faithfulness and whatever they were given.
Okay, right.
Whether it's talent, whether it's money, whether the emphasis is faithfulness, and whether in that applies to all areas of our life.
Right, that is true. The emphasis is certainly on faithfulness, and I'm going to get to that. But faithfulness in exactly what? Okay, so this is the thing. I think what we can say is this: that what we're dealing here too is with responsibility. He says he gave. What did he say? And how did he decide? 5, you get 5, you get 2, you get 1. See, the Lord decides that, right? How does he decide it? Based on what? It says it here.
For every man according to his ability.
Okay, his several ability. And now that's right here in verse 15. And now to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, or his abilities, and straightway took his journey. All right, now, what does that mean? That means the Lord looked at this person and said, okay, I think this person can handle a little bit more than this one, handle a little bit more than this other person can, so I'm going to give him more responsibility. To this person, he can handle a little bit more, or she can handle a little bit more responsibility, so I'm going to give him or her this much, okay, whatever. Does the Lord condemn people for not having that as much of a capacity or responsibility? It's not really, there isn't really any condemnation for that here. So then we have an inherent ability to be able to handle things. Some people can't handle as many things, but they do a very good job with a few things. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? Nothing at all wrong with that. There's no condemnation here. And then some other people can. Some positions in or responsibilities inherently involve being more precise and being more exact and being more like problem solving. In other words, very concise. It's not so much, but it requires a lot of attention. Other things are just more things and maybe don't require as much of attention, but you have to have the capacity to be able to put it all together. So the idea is abilities. These abilities. Now, the talents and the abilities are kind of separate, isn't it? He sees the ability and then he gives the talents based on the ability. So I'm just working through this in my mind too. What do we say really is a talent? Well, it's any opportunity we have, and I think Rick kind of touched on it. It's anything that we have that we can be faithful with. Okay, I think we can in general say that. All right, so what would that be? Well, okay, you say to yourself, well, I believe The Lord is leading me to, I don't know, anything, be a teacher, okay? You may not be necessarily really, really good at teaching, but you feel the Lord is leading you that way. The Lord gives you strength and the ability and wisdom to be able to do that. And that's also involved here. But I think talents are that. It's anything that you can work with. Remember we said, now here we fall back on the contextual historical settings, everything that you can work with. If the parable of the 10 virgins deals with vigilance, we said the 10 talents deals with working. So these talents also are something that you can work with. It's something that we're doing something. It has to do with doing something, all right? So I think it's just whatever we're tasked with. Whatever the Lord says, I want you to do this. Okay, I'll take it. If we look at it in a church setting, it might be anything that the pastor or the leader of that ministry would give us to do. We just need to be faithful in it. It's as simple as that. Some people might see a little bit more of an ability to be able to do things in somebody than others, and so they're given that responsibility. Maybe it's more of a leadership responsibility, maybe not. Some people can handle that, some people can't. If just because you really can't handle leadership positions, does that mean there's a condemnation involved with it? Not at all. You need both. So, and although this is maybe a little bit ambiguous, still at the same time, I think talents are just any opportunity for service at all. But it's in conjunction with service to the Lord there. Okay, so it's anything that we can be faithful in. Anything that the Lord, in the time of His judging what you've done or haven't done, is able to say, well done, and you've been faithful in it.
I've heard this applied to soul winning. This parable, do you think that would be right to do that?
Well, I wouldn't say, yeah, obviously it's something that you can be faithful in, certainly, yeah, sure, and which will go along with the gospel. I think that to every person is given that one, so that would certainly be part of it.
With that too, it would also just be a way to satisfy the question of increasing, because God does give each of us different soul winning opportunities, and according to how we use those opportunities, we can see people one to the Lord, and then they can win others, and then...
Okay. So the number of people you win to the Lord?
I mean, that doesn't mean that
I'm being
the...
the...
giving 5 or whatever, but...
Okay. The idea is faithfulness. I think that's the key. If you're faithful at soul winning, then the increase then is really increase in more responsibility is what it is. Because what he says is that you've been faithful over a few things, now be ruler over many things. You're given more responsibility. All right? So it really has to do with what we do with what we're given. Okay, this is what the talent is. Now, all right, so let's get into a little bit more of the teaching then, and or application. So we look. Okay, so what is the main idea? I think the main idea the Lord is getting across is working semicolon faithfulness during, let's say, the espousal period, which is the time before the Lord's return. That's pretty clear. Okay, because he's gone away and before he comes back again. It's pretty clear. We're talking about the time period. So it must include where we're at now. Okay, now let's look at some points then in regards to the teaching of the parable. So in this, we're just going to think through some of this. All right. So there is diversity between the individuals that were given these things because they is according to their several ability. If unto one was given 5, and if in our situation, how many, and it's different in the book of Luke, okay? I don't know if the percentage would be the same, but having kind of a mathematical mind, we have 8 total, right? And so 5 out of those 8 is about 63%. So 63% of the talents given out were given to one person. 2 talents is be 25%, 1/4, and then 1 talent was 12%. So if you're just going to look at it quantitatively, you got 63, 25, and 12. The one that had 5 talents was given a lion's share of the responsibility. What does that kind of teach us maybe? That unto a few people is given a larger leadership role, okay? There's a few people that way. I mean, how many pastors do you have at the church? One. He's leadership over that. And he can choose, of course, to have whoever he wants to help him with that leadership. But that is, I think that's probably pretty close to the way the percentages run that way. All right, then we talked about the severability. And I think the important thing to remember then is we're not responsible for things that we're not responsible for. I know that's painfully simple, okay, but the things that is somebody else's responsibility, the Lord holds them responsible for it, not us. Okay. These talents were given when the Lord left. That's when they were given. It wasn't really according to the birth that they were given these things. It said when he ascended unto high, he gave gifts unto men, Ephesians chapter 4. So this is particularly related to our faithfulness in the church. It is true that before service always comes surrender. And when we surrender ourselves to do these things, that's when I think the Lord bestows those talents. All right? It's people that, Christians maybe, that are part of a church, and they're pulled into this misunderstanding of what a church is. And they never really step out to serve the Lord at all, and never surrender, never really come to realize what those talents are. They're never really given anything. Because remember, it has to do with responsibility. So if it has to deal with being responsible, we have to show ourselves responsible. How do we show ourselves responsible? Well, by surrender. That's how it is. The more that we surrender, the more that we're given. All right, so does it deal with pride? No. Where is it tempered here? Because to the person that is given more responsibility, more is expected of that person too, right? So it goes hand in hand. So it has nothing to do with pride. If pride is involved, then what keeps this from being the case is judgment, because there's going to be a judgment of works one day. What we were given to be faithful with will be judged one day regardless. And that's why we say sometimes that we'll be surprised when we get to heaven who will be rewarded. Because it doesn't have to do with how much you're given. It has to do with how faithful you've been with what you've been given. So the person that just faithfully discharged their duties continually, and may have been a small thing, but they did it continually, is going to be rewarded in heaven. So that removes that pride. All right, so with each talent comes more responsibility, also more of a chance for judgment. Okay, let's see. All right, so then, the first servant says, I have gained okay, so let's see. Let me go through that. 5 talents, knowledge, you said 5 bought. Okay, so look at verse 20. It says that, and so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. So how many does he have then? So if we're going to look at it literally, and I think this is symbolically, it would be like putting your money into the bank for interest. Be symbolically that way. I don't think this was actual money, but symbolically. So how many did he have at the end of it? We had 10 talents, didn't he? At the end of it all. He had the 5 he was given plus 5 more. Then the Lord said to him, well done. Then he that received 2 talents came and said, Lord, deliver unto me 2 talents, but behold, I have gained 2 other talents. So how many talents did he have at the end of it? 4, right? So what percent increase is that? In both cases?
200%.
Percent increase. Dun, dun, dun. Anyway, the point is the percent would be the same when it's doubled both times, right? It's 100% increase. He'll ends up with 200% of it, but it's 100% increase. So, but it's the same. So whether the person was given 5 talents, at the end it was the same percent increase as the one that had 2 talents. You see that? So it's the same thing, if you look at it that way. By utilizing what we have and not worrying about what we have not. All right, this is the important thought. Now, let me, this idea of labor. I think it's interesting. Let me bring this out. The unjust steward. Okay, let me just back out a little bit. This idea of laboring and receiving rewards from the labor. The unjust steward, if you remember, he went out and he said to these people, I want you to be, not the unjust steward, sorry, see I get these titles mixed up. The one where they were sitting idle and he told them to go out there and to work in the field. What do we call that one? It was...
Laborers in the vineyard.
Yeah, Laborers in the Vineyard. There you go. Okay, that was the title I gave it. The Laborers in the Vineyard. Now was there an equivalent reward for labor? I'm saying, did it equal their labor? No, it didn't, did it? The people, if it were the case, if the principles described here were applied to the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, then the people that worked longer in the field would have gained more. Correct? So this is a different perspective, isn't it? So what makes the difference? Is the Lord teaching, does he have opposing teaching here? Okay, the laborers in the vineyard, you had these people labored more, but they were given the same amount. Here, the people that were more faithful of what they had received more. So what's the difference? Well, I think one thing we can say is, to who was it spoken to? The parable of the laborers in the vineyard were directly spoken to the Jewish people, wasn't it? And they were primarily unsaved people, and they had the wrong attitude and the wrong aspect of authority. The parable of this one here of the talents is given in particular to the disciples and the apostles, okay, who were primarily saved, not everybody. So it's kind of interesting. This person that had the one talent but did nothing with it, who was the one apostle that was there listening to that? Judas Iscariot. I wonder if that isn't part of it. So I've spoken to the disciples then who were mostly saved, and it's an encouragement for them to work. So it's an entirely different group of people that he's dealing with here. All right. So I think it's important to bring that out to understand that. Okay, a few more things. So let's look a little bit more at this person with one talent. Okay, so we're still teaching here. What is it about this servant? Now, what we can say is that he's called a servant. He's called it a wicked, slothful, and unprofitable servant, but he's a servant nonetheless. So he's called a servant, and he was somebody then that we can say was unfaithful. The Lord says that. So he was given a little bit. It wasn't given much, but he wasn't even faithful with what he was given. Now, look at the attitude then of this person. What does he say? All right, look at verse 23. The Lord said to him, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." So then he which had received the one talent. So the person that received the one talent apparently watched the 5 and 2 talent person. Then he which had received one talent said, "Lord," and so let's see. And so you received 5 talents, came and brought the other 5 talents. So these servants come to the Lord, and they gave an account for what they've done. This person then that had one talent gives an account of his stewardship, you could say. Then which had received the one talent came and he said, "Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown and gathering where thou hast not strawed." He's giving an excuse of why he did nothing, why he was not faithful. This is what he's doing, giving excuses. "And I was afraid and went and hid my talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine." All right, so what does he ultimately blame? Who does he blame?
Master.
He blames the Lord. See, the reason why I didn't do it is because of how you are. What he's saying. He says, you're a hard man, reaping where you have not strawed and gathering where thou hast not, reaping where thou hast not sown and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And he says, I was afraid and went and hid my talent. I was afraid because of who you are. I was afraid. Why afraid? Afraid to do what? Afraid of giving his rewards up to the Lord. He had a problem with authority, didn't he? He didn't really understand that the things that he was given were not his own. And it's really kind of envious, isn't it? It's kind of like saying, because he didn't even take that talent and use it for himself. He did absolutely nothing with it. What we have here is total and complete neglect. It's almost like, I don't want to do the wrong thing because my Lord is such a terrible taskmaster, so I'm just not going to do anything, good or bad, right? This is kind of a Gnostic understanding. It's really very pagan. But so I'm not going to do anything at all. I'm just going to, nothing. It's kind of Buddhist, really, Hinduish, quite frankly. But he didn't do anything with it. It's kind of strange. In fact, what did he do? I think he says he hid it. He hid it in the ground. He buried it. Is that right? therefore, let's see. Yeah, he says, I was afraid and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast the design. So he doesn't even bring it. He doesn't even unearth it for him. He digs it in there. He says, if you want it, it's over there. Go get it. Wow, that's something, isn't it? And he justifies all of that according to the character of the Lord. Now, did he have to take that talent? He didn't have to take it, but he did. He was given that responsibility. He should have taken it. Should have done something with it, but he didn't do anything. And the Lord said, well, you could have at least just put it into the bank and gotten usury from it, in which case you wouldn't have done anything. It's better than putting it in the earth. You could have at least gotten some interest from it. What kind of work does it take to stick it in a bank and get interest from it? Nothing. You just stick it in there, and by virtue of the fact that it's in there, you gain interest. Could have at least done that. He did none of those things. So his problem wasn't that he couldn't, was it? His problem was a problem with attitude. And in this case, actually, there was probably an incapacity. He probably didn't have the capacity to do it, because I don't even believe that he was even saved. Again, this is probably dealing, or at least figuratively speaking, not figuratively, but symbolically, this would be Judas Iscariot. If it was his disciples and apostles there, was the Lord dealing with him directly? Maybe. I don't know that. It doesn't say that he was, but I think it is certainly fit, because here was somebody that was there. He was with the rest of them. He was listening to all this teaching. He was doing all these things. He was one of the 70 sent out to do on their preaching ministry. He was there. He had his feet washed. All the rest of it, Judas Iscariot went through all of those things. And yet he is very much like this person that hid his talent and did nothing with it. So, all right, so this is his understanding. He just did nothing with it. He is charged then by the Lord, not with doing something actively wrong, but what is his sin? Thou wicked and slothful. There was a sin of just doing nothing. That's sinful. By the way, is slothfulness sinful? Yes, it definitely is. What does the Lord say about slothful people? Go to the ant, thou sluggard, Proverbs chapter 6. Consider her ways and be wise. Which having no guide, overseer, and ruler. I think that's such good teaching there. Because let's understand this. What is the thing about an ant? An ant does what it's supposed to do, even though there's nobody over her. You know, the worker ants are all female. Even though there's nobody over her, she still works and does those things that she's supposed to do. Having no guide, overseer, or ruler, gathereth their food in the harvest and all of that. And here we have the Lord going away. So was the Lord directly over them, making sure that they fulfilled their responsibility? He was not. Okay? So they were supposed to be self-motivated. Now listen to me. In the ministry, you've got to be self-motivated. You have to be. And that's true physically. In other words, if you don't keep yourself in shape, it's your fault. You have to be self-motivated to do it. You have to be self-motivated to study, to stay sharp, to stay on those things. Nobody's going to be over you. Now, I'm talking about a pastor position. Nobody's going to be over you to do those things, and especially a missionary, because not only are they're in another country, okay? You have to be self-motivated. If it doesn't get done, it's because you don't have the personal drive inside yourself to do it. End of story. Okay? So it is so very important that we understand we have to be self-motivated. We have to be able to drive ourselves. Okay? You have to have that. And it's the same thing with these people. These people that received 5 and 2 talents, they were self-motivated. They did something with it. You have to be that way. If you need somebody over you to tell you what to do all the time to make sure you get something done, then you're going to need to get past that. And if you're going to be in the leadership position, if you say, well, the Lord's called me to be you see, here's the thing you need to understand. You say that God's calling is on your life. Okay, you've come to receive training for that. That's great. But there's a lot that goes along with it. And if you've accepted that calling, there's a lot that goes along with it. A lot. Lots of responsibilities put on that. And you've got to learn, and I don't know why this is coming up again, but there has to be a measure of maturity. There has to be there. Now, enough said. So you can neglect. And let me just say, too, time goes by. Speaking of time going by, 35, right? Okay, I've got a few minutes. Okay, so the wrong view of God himself. So that was really the problem. The problem with this person is that that one talent person had a wrong view of God himself. He saw God as a wicked taskmaster. When the truth is, he wouldn't have those talents. He wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for the Lord. What would he do? All right, so then there's condemnation. We have then the pronouncement of judgment. Now, the person that is the Lord has the right to do that. And so what does he say then? Take the talent from him and give it to the person that has another. Of course, this is in the blessing time. All right, so then there's a manifold blessings of those people who are faithful and responsible. The good thing is that the Lord just requires faithfulness, and that anybody can do. He sees our severability. He knows what we can handle and not handle. He gives us that responsibility. He just expects us to be faithful with it and not to be lazy and to squander that. Okay, so what happens to this unprofitable servant? Well, out of darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, there's certainly going to be judgment against that person, clearly. All right, and so that weeping and gnashing of teeth is a phrase that is used commonly in the book of Matthew, but it deals with the judgment when the Lord comes back again. Okay, here to his church people, and here, of course, to really the whole world, this 7-year period deals with judgment. But the weeping and gnashing of teeth has to do with judgment directly. All right, so and the Lord has that right to judge those things. All right, yeah, okay, you're dismissed. That's it.